he's a winner. He is. And I think it's one of those where you look at where he's come from, and there's definitely a football snobbery out there where people have come from different leagues, different things, and you kind of fail to appreciate, I think, just how difficult it is to win in some of these scenarios as well. Honestly, everything that Ange Postecoglou has done in football has been to make his dad proud. And it's such a simple message and connection that, so many of us try to just make our parents proud. And I think that's an instant clicking kind of identifier with anyone.
That noise, heard faintly all around the world, is of Arsenal fans and Tottenham Hotspur supporters salivating at the prospect of this weekend's epic North London derby. Both teams undefeated, capable of unfurling collectively joyous football and clashing in a game in which all of the good vibes are up for grabs. So it is magical to welcome a bloke whom, honestly, I've long admired. An insightful, engaging gent who grew up idolising Indiana Jones, Daily Planet reporter Clark Kent and Spurs striker Teddy Sheringham in equal measure, forging them together. He said, you know what, I'm not going to fight rival archaeologists over questionable art discoveries. Instead, he followed his other inspiration, becoming an incredibly deeply sourced, grippingly analytical Spurs reporter who's pulled off the impossible, gaining the respect of club insiders while somehow not being called unspeakable names by internet strangers. His popular YouTube channel, Gent loves a close-up more than Sergio Leone during a shootout, has racked up over 10 million views, largely because of his insightful thinking and his abilities as an unofficial Spurs whisperer to empathise with Spurs supporters as a Spurs supporter and storytell their journey with calm insight that honestly within football is so bloody rare. It's a joy to welcome Mr. Alasdair Gold.
Hello, Rog. That is honestly the greatest intro I've ever had in my life. I would love that just to play as I walk out anywhere. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
We are just 2 days before the North London derby, first of the season, at a time when both Spurs and Arsenal are undefeated in the Premier League. Both have harvested 13 points from their first 5 games. Spurs sitting an astounding second in the table on goal difference. When was the last time that derby felt this significant, with both sides hurtling in on such a feel-good high? This feels like joyously Godzilla versus Kong in front of the clock end. I mean, this feels very different to limbering into this game in seasons past.
Absolutely. There's a real feel-good factor around Spurs. I would say, if we're going to be fair to Antonio Conte, and we have to be, I think the one towards the end of his first season was a biggie, but that was at home, obviously. That was probably one of the best atmospheres that I've ever experienced at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. We've got to give that to Conte, and obviously they ran out 3-0 winners. That was a biggie, but I would say there was a difference in how the teams were coming into it compared to this one, whereas there's no getting away from it. Arsenal have really built over the last year and a half or so, even maybe more, to the stage where obviously they were title contenders last season, and now very much Spurs are coming in as the underdogs. They were technically behind Arsenal at that point under Conte, but it was one of those where you could feel that maybe if they could win it, they could pull the momentum back. Whereas this, I think Spurs are very much coming in as loath to use the smaller team, but I guess in terms of what's happened in the last year, I don't think you can't. Yeah, you have to say that they have. Arsenal have had a more successful last year to 18 months or so, and they are the side to beat now in North London. But it's a very different Tottenham Hotspur.
Full disclosure, I have always felt a deep empathy for Tottenham Hotspur. I've always believed they were the Everton of the South. That is until Everton went completely south on their own direction. But it is early days, Alasdair, and your Spurs are off to their best start. I'm going to whisper this part so I do not curse it. Since, I believe, the 1965 season, same year, and then 18-year-old Roy Hodgson, barely shaving, was trying to make the Crystal Palace first team. That's how long ago that was. And a huge part of that resurgence can be credited to one man and one man alone. He's almost a demigod. Your new manager, Ange Postecoglou, the most endearing Australian export since Bluey and Bingo. And just before he was announced, you said, candidly, he wouldn't have been your first choice as manager, but that you were, quote, converted after spending time on YouTube, going down the wormhole, just watching interview after interview with him. You said you'd watched so many that you were, quote, worried that you'd start speaking in an Australian accent, mate. What flipped the switch for you? What did you see on that wormhole YouTube journey? What did you hear that made you believe, this gent, different, but maybe he is the right man for the job?
I think understanding that he's a winner. He is. And I think it's one of those where you look at where he's come from, and there's definitely a football snobbery out there where people have come from different leagues, different things, and you kind of fail to appreciate, I think, just how difficult it is to win in some of these scenarios as well. And some of the teams that he transformed into, sides from that were flirting maybe with relegation or were further down, he turned them into champions. And just listening to him, it was mainly listening, to be fair. Obviously, YouTube will throw up so many team talks he's done, things like that, but there's so many podcasts that he's done where you get an incredible insight into this guy and how everything he is just kind of from this family connection with his dad. It's about making his dad proud. It's about
Dimitri.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Known as Jim to his mates. Yeah, he was honestly everything that Ange Postecoglou has done in football has been to make his dad proud, and it's such a simple kind of message and connection that so many of us try to just make our parents proud, and I think that's an instant clicking kind of identifier with anyone. And then when you listen to him, he's a charismatic guy. He sweeps you away with him, and yeah, absolutely, like you said beforehand, I was lured in by the big names, despite the trappings that have been there for Spurs in the past. I like the idea.
You can name them. Who did you like?
Yeah,
Sean Dyche.
Sean Dyche definitely was right up there. Mainly Nagelsmann and Arne Slot as well. I liked the idea of him as a younger, maybe Poch type coming in. But yeah, the moment I started diving down that rabbit hole into the world of Ange Postecoglou, honestly, I was swept away. And to be fair, he's lived up to it since. Press conferences are great fun. He is a fascinating character.
All right, let's talk, though, about this Spurs Odyssey. Slightly hyperbolic word for 5 bloody games. But when we talk about that 1965 start, best points total since that, let's talk about how that Spurs side eventually fell to an 8th place finish. But like you and many podcasters, he loves a podcast. He does. He's one of the great... He's not so much a manager, he's just a charming podcaster, Ange Postecoglou. And he came on with me. And in that interview, that big Australian Care Bear, he said to us what he said to pretty well everybody before a ball had been kicked. He warned us. He managed our expectations, Alasdair. He said the first month or so of an Ange Postecoglou managed team, he said they're turbulent, mate. He says it's going to feel like it's all going wrong before it goes right. He talked about how players take time to come to grips with his exacting vision. And God, everywhere he'd been, Brisbane, Melbourne, Yokohama, Celtic, that is what occurred. They got rid of their best player. Things felt like they were going down the crapper. Then lo and behold, just a switch flicked. It gelled and they soared. But that didn't happen at Tottenham. Almost nothing has gone wrong. How do you understand that? And almost, is that frightening?
Absolutely what it is. I'm terrified. I am. And I think it's been just ingrained into me by covering Spurs, supporting Spurs before that as well, of something's going to go wrong. And I think that's exactly what it is. We were all expecting this big kind of adjustment period. And the fact that it's absolutely been fantastic so far. Honestly, he's been like a breath of fresh air around the club, and the players have all bought into it. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe they were so desperate for something different that they've clung to his philosophy. And let's be honest, as he always tells us, he plays football. He wants the players to play the kind of football they did when they were a kid, why they loved the game, why they got into it in the first place. And if you're a player and someone's telling you, go out there and enjoy yourself, you're going to do it. And maybe that has contributed to having had such a stricter control over them with the likes of Antonio Conte and Mourinho and even Nuno as well. We've got to mention him, even though he was there for about a week. Suddenly having someone saying, yeah, we're going to have a structure, but within it, you're going to have fun. And I think they've just exploded into this season in a way that maybe it is. Maybe that's what it is. It's the perfect time for Postecoglou that he's come into a club so desperate for him. And maybe that hasn't always been the case elsewhere. That could be it.
God, it is fascinating that, the just number one, humanly, you're never more afraid when things are almost going too well. And as an Everton fan, I can't even remember when things were going well, but distantly in my muscle memory, I do achingly remember. Chicago Bears fan, God, I know that all too well. But watching your Spurs, it's not just that he's saying, go and play like when you were kids, go and enjoy it. He also seems to give players like James Maddison permission to make mistakes so they can almost play without fear.
Absolutely. That is one of the biggest things that he did. He often speaks about a game, I think it was at Melbourne, or it might have been even at Brisbane Roar, where he knew in the moment, even though they got absolutely tonked, I think it was, in a game against their rivals, but it was one young defender who made the same mistake twice. And in that moment, it was like, they've got it. They understand it. They're doing what I want. They will play that ball out from the back, even though they've just cost a goal. They'll do it again. And that's it. And then in that moment, he knows he's got the team taking risks and playing the football. And that's, I feel like maybe he's seen that with Spurs already. It's already happening.
Andre Onana, if you're watching, raw Salona. But despite coming across as an appealing combination, a rare for football, he's like half motivational speaker, half sitcom dad. You noticed in one of your episodes about Ange's imminent arrival that he actually tends to keep some distance between himself and his players. He's not on the back of the bus with them on the journey on away games, just ripping farts and crapping beers. He doesn't have long conversations with them off the pitch. And he doesn't just want. He's the kind of guy that expects discipline from his players. Tell us what you've made of the man close up. You've been in many Ange press conferences. They are must-watch television. I've got to say, when I click off them, I always feel better about life, not just about football, but better about life after watching Ange speak just about the bloody game ahead at the weekend. But what have you noticed about him? His aura, his oratory, his difference?
Yeah, he's an incredible communicator. I was very fortunate, and I think this gave us a great sense. The guys that went out on the pre-season tour in Perth, we sat down with him for a good almost an hour, and he was very much, I mean, to be fair, you don't really get too much of a different Ange off camera to do on camera. He is very much as he is. He's straight talking. He says it what it is. But he was quite relaxed. He was sat back in his chair, and we were discussing just, I guess, his life and everything. I actually asked him, one of the questions was, this whole thing about speaking to players for maybe just a minute at a time, is this real? Can you actually do that? And he was like, it's been exaggerated slightly over the years. He said, it's fair. If I want to talk to someone, I will chat with them and things like that. He said, but yeah, it is born of his first club taking over at Melbourne as South Hillis as was he wasn't player manager. I think he was manager, and he was managing a lot of his previous mates and teammates. And he had to very quickly realise that he couldn't make any emotional decisions. He had to separate himself from them. And I think he told one of his best mates that, like, you got to retire, mate, or you got to leave. It's time for you to move on. And he realised in that moment, it's time to not be emotionally connected to players. I've got to step back. But even he said, yeah, there's only so much you can do that. But he just hates small talk. Honestly, that's what he always tells us. He hates it. He can't just sit there and have a chat about the weather or all that. It's just amazing because he can hold court. Honestly, he can talk to us. His press conferences are much longer than many of the other managers. He will sit there and we're all like, you just soak it up. You're absolutely loving what he's saying because he's so insightful. But then I'd imagine if you went over and spoke to him just after by the desk, he'd be like itching to get away. It's just a fascinating guy.
Yeah, there's a concept of just a loud introvert. And when I watch Ange, ultimately one-on-one, he'd rather not be with people. But when he gets the chance to speak, to address, to sermonise, he is utterly thrilling. And I relate to some degree. But you told a magical story, I love this, of an Aussie international who sat beside Ange on a flight and was so afraid, almost in revering that kind of fear, that he wouldn't even get up to pee during a 16-hour flight because he didn't want to disturb him. I mean, to disturb him. To some degree, I'm like, wow, bladder strength. But there's a beautiful a core of emotion in that story.
Absolutely. And I think he'd been a bit of a, how do I put this, a cheeky chappy behind the scenes. So it was kind of like a little mini punishment that Ange had arranged for him to sit next to him and then blocked him in for the entire 16-hour flight, knowing full well that he wouldn't say a word to him through the whole thing. And yeah,
I bet you Ange's a man spreader too.
I'd imagine he takes up his more than his portion of the area on the seat. Yeah, definitely. He's just got that brilliant way of knowing just the right amount to say to a player to inspire them, to make them feel close to him. That's been the strangest thing, is that despite being a guy that doesn't talk to them much, they love him. Honestly, Basuma calls him like an uncle to him. Maddison kind of sees him as almost like a cuddly bear type, I think, as well. Kulusevski said that he's this fun yet calm guy. And this is a guy that, has come into a scenario as, maybe an unknown to some of them. And he's won them over so quickly. And it's that ability, I think, just to know the absolute right amount to say to another person.
Ange's arrival comes a season after another manager. I must mention his name here. Arteta's already added 2 domestic trophies to his cabinet. He's brought Champions League football back to the Emirates for the first time in 6 years. Be honest, Alasdair, how much did witnessing the former, Arsenal's resurgence, make the latter just this grinding Spurs journey all the more painful an experience as a Tottenham fan?
I think that's it. I think you've hit the nail on the head. And I think for the fan base as a collective, it just made it even more galling. Just watching your own team kind of sliding and into this kind of slumber, really. To go through, 4 head coaches within about 6 months overall, just to see what was happening at Arsenal. And I think a lot of Spurs fans also have looked at what Arsenal have done and have thought, well, that's what we were doing with Pochettino. And it's like, but he's just been back to that extra little degree that has maybe pushed them over the line. Whereas Spurs were an almost team under Pochettino. Whereas with Arteta, maybe, they've certainly racked up the FA Cups as well. So, yeah, I think it just reminds you of what you could have had. And maybe that's what makes Postecoglou even better. That maybe you think, okay, well, we start again and maybe we can go somewhere.
You really did start again in the most profound of ways, because just a day before this Premier League season kicked off and the big Ange era got off to its official start after weeks of endless friction, endless speculation, Harry Kane said auf Wiedersehen to Tottenham, the club he'd been connected to since 2004, since he was an 11-year-old youth player. He left with 280 goals in all comps as the club's all-time top scorer, trading a chance to snatch Alan Shearer's Premier League scoring record for a contract with Bayern Munich, a pair of lederhosen, and probably most importantly, a lifetime deal with Skechers. And that gent, he'd live for little more than North London Derby's top scorer all-time with 14 goals, wonder strikes. But is there a case to be made? Stay with me here, Alasdair. That Harryless, without their dominant individual, Spurs could find out this season they're actually better off as a collective, as a team.
First off, I have to say, Harry Kane is one of the best players I've ever watched at Tottenham Hotspur in my time. And I have no doubt that even just seeing him in the friendly against Shakhtar Donetsk just before the season started, that in a Postecoglou team, he would score the most unbelievable amount of goals in the season. I genuinely believe that. However, the kind of the postscript, what's happened since, I think has to have shown that as a collective, it's a different Tottenham Hotspur. Whether it can be a better one, we'll see in the long term. But definitely as a collective, I think a lot of players not suddenly, I don't want to say in the shadow of Harry Kane, maybe more so that they've got now more responsibility and that's bringing more out of them. Even like Sonny. Sonny is one of the most worldwide names, one of the biggest players in the game. Yet I still think he was always maybe feeling, or people were seeing him as playing second fiddle to Harry Kane. Whereas now, Sonny's the captain, he's the star. But there's also so many other players. Maddison now is a big player in the game as well. Basuma has come out of his shell. Even players at the back like Christian Romero emerging as a new leader as well, one of the vice captains. And I think collectively sharing this responsibility rather than constantly thinking, I'll give the ball to Harry and he'll make something happening. I think naturally that brings a different side to a team. And we've seen it in the past, like with Coutinho at Liverpool, sometimes taking someone who would still be brilliant in that team, but taking them out of that, it just allows others to step up that game that little bit more, and as a collective, you get a better thing.
Emotionally, after all these seasons of marvelling at this English man written off constantly, but unwilling to buckle, unwilling to willing only to score goal after goal after goal in the most remarkable human way, to be candid. Does it feel a little sacrilegious to admit this, to engage even in this conversation as a Spurs fan? Or does it feel bloody thrilling? Who knew? Once we pushed the baby tooth out, a grown-up one grew. Oh, that was even better.
It just feels weird. It feels so bizarre because we've been, let's be honest, we've been kind of fearing this moment for so long that it was going to happen. There was always the hope that he was going to stay and, retire an old man with all his Spurs pajamas on and everything, whatever. But there was always this feeling that at some point, if Spurs didn't grow at the same rate that Harry Kane did, that he was going to have to go somewhere else. But what I think has surprised most people is that we expected such utter doom, despair and gloom around the club afterwards. And I'm going to be completely honest, no one's really talking about him. And that is such a huge thing. It's like, only the players are talking about it if they're asked. And the same with Postecoglou. Even the fans. Some fans get annoyed if I even mention him in a video or a podcast because he's gone. He's the past. And I think that absolutely has to be all credit to Ange Postecoglou because he's created this environment where we're not thinking about the past. We're only excited about what comes next. And unfortunately, in a way, that also includes Harry Kane. And that's incredible because I never saw that coming, that we wouldn't be even really that fussed about Harry Kane going, despite him being one of the greatest players that Spurs has ever produced.
God, the idea of one God is dead. Now we worship many gods. I love this. But, there's been so many challenges to Spurs for you past seasons. You've questioned the fitness of players. You've questioned their mental toughness. You've watched them score early goals. You've watched them capitulate. Losing those leads dramatically. You just think about Tottenham and Liverpool. You think of a 94th minute Diogo Jota winner or a 90th minute Bobby Firmino winner. The list goes on and on and on. Even when they weren't playing Liverpool at all. There's been a long running joke about this team, which honestly plagued them. You've mentioned it in your videos even, Spursiness. And like most jokes, there's some truth in humour. Yet last week, this team pulled off, the best great escape since the Blur album. They scored 2 goals in extra time, took all 3 points from Sheffield United. Stunning. Latest come from behind win in the Premier League history. And Spurs, historically, we think of them as entertainers, at their best, artistes, goal scorers. But this side, how are you experiencing Tottenham tenacity, Tottenham perseverance, Alasdair?
The thing I've always kind of come to understand and believe about Tottenham Hotspur is that anything can happen in any given moment with that team. Honestly, they can bring you the greatest high when you least expect it and the most crushing low when you don't see that coming either. And like you say, you can have that moment at Anfield where they can suddenly concede after having come back. But then you can have a night like we did in Amsterdam where Lucas Moura just pulls out the most incredible night probably ever of my football reporting career. And then you can have,
Did you shout out in the press box, Alasdair? Or were you just like, sorry, I'm objective, I'm ascribed to my keyboard?
I was too busy getting covered in beer because all the Ajax fans above us were so upset they threw all their beer on us. And honestly, there was chaos. There were journalists with laptops sizzling and going off. And when you're trying to write whatever 94th minute winner or whatever it was, it was more chaos than there was excitement. Don't get me wrong. That's probably the closest I've been to the child fan in me, kind of desperately ripping, trying to get out of me.
You can be honest. Was the Alasdair Gold shirt on or off when that Moura goal went in the It was off, wasn't it? You had your Richarlison back tattoo on shape.
That's it. That is a massive. It was Lucas Moura back then, a massive Lucas Moura on my back. But just going back to the original thing, it's like Spurs do show these incredible moments of spirit and tenacity. But yet they also have this nature of just crumbling. I mean, let's be honest. We had that Lucas Moura moment, and then a couple of minutes into the final, Sissoko gets done for a handball that never was afterwards. Honestly, anything can happen in any given moment. So I'm loath to kind of get too excited when they're showing spirit in games, but I also don't get too wound up if they have a bad moment late in a game, because anything can happen next.
Spurs, the way you describe them, Spurs are life itself, a reflection of life itself, which ultimately I do believe is why we watch and love football. But one of the most enduring moments of that Sheffield United win was seeing Son Heung-min, now Spurs captain Sonny, pushing Richarlison towards the home supporters at the final whistle so that he could bask in the spotlight, bask in the love, the joy, the support from the fans after he delivered a goal and an assist in time added on. My Lord, how he needed both of those things after really the past couple of months that he's talked about, so openly and I think bravely. And Sonny said post-game that he was happier for Richarlison to score than he would have been if he'd found the back of the net himself, which for Sonny, to be clear, a Gentoo who's been bred by his father to do one thing and one thing only, which is to score goals, is a remarkable statement. And watching Sonny, watching him celebrate that final goal, racing off the bench, he might be the perfect Ange Ball captain, just a gent soaked in emotion, all too rare emotion in elite football, to be candid, but also this new side we're seeing so much more this season of empathy. And ultimately, I believe, and you'd know better than I would because you're living it close up, I think that's the greatest unique Ange Ball characteristic that sets it apart from everything we've seen before, is that value. It is driven at its heart by empathy.
Absolutely. And let's be honest, if you've got a football team that you want everyone to enjoy, who's the best person to have at the head of that as someone who's always smiling? Honestly, and that attitude, that need to constantly kind of be happy and everyone else around him to be happy is why Sonny is perfect for this. And like you say, the empathy. Postecoglou made a real point yesterday. He was at the Tuesday night at the fans forum, and he was speaking about the kind of players he likes to bring in. And he said, you can look at all the data, and that's great. He uses a lot of it, but a lot of his recruitment is also based on the type of person they are and the character they are and how they will interact with the others within his system. And that's it. That's
like what? Tell us more about that. It's fascinating, Alasdair.
Yeah, I mean, he does. He looks at the kind of players, and I asked him about Brennan Johnson the day after he signed, and he was like, he's got all these physical attributes, he's got the pace and everything, but I saw a guy that was just really hungry and at that moment in his career to impress. And he was exactly the same about James Maddison. He said James Maddison has reached that moment in his life where, let's be honest, James Maddison's been seen as a little bit of a lad maybe over the years, but he's hit this point in his life where had a little boy, he's just had twins as well. He was looking for a club where he could settle down and become, I guess, almost like not quite a father figure, but a guiding figure. And so he does, he picks these players in the exact moments of their careers when he feels that they can give him the maximum for what he wants within a squad. And that's what happens. And you get this tight-knit nature. You get the empathy. You get players that want everyone else to do well. And again, it comes back to the collective. It's so important.
God, I can just imagine Ange talking deeply to James Maddison. Sometimes it's okay to be the beta guy at the Sunday roast, James. You don't always have to be the alpha at the Sunday roast, James, just walking off, just having his brain frazzled. But, the one player that does stand out, we've talked about him a little bit, is Richarlison, who is a deeply, if you spent any time with him, deeply sensitive human being. Moved to Spurs from Everton in the summer of 2022. But he's proceeded to have really more new tattoos than starts last season, scoring just 3 goals all competitions. Ultimately, he's a pure confidence player. He's been bravely open about his desire to work with a psychologist to help him through his current challenges. And at Everton, like all semi-good Everton players, if you're that status at Everton, you are never threatened about your place on the starting 11. He scored 53 goals, each one just a means to an end, so he could tear his shirt off at least 53 times. And long-term, despite the feel-good of last weekend, knowing what you know about the kind of complete players Ange needs across the front line, what pathway do you see, if any, for Richarlison at Spurs?
Oh, I think he's definitely got a pathway there. To be fair, and whether it was because he had in the back of his mind that Kane was going and maybe he had to big him up, but he was very full of praise for Richarlison from day one. I think he saw him as the, again, greatest player maybe that Spurs have ever had, Harry Kane, but maybe in terms of Postecoglou's system, Richarlison is the more natural stereotype, I guess, of what a Postecoglou forward would look like and how they would play and the way they sacrificed themselves for the team. And I think he's got a big part to play. Look, if we could have written a script for this week for Richarlison, especially how it ended, that would be the way it would end. It was remarkable. Like you say, so incredibly brave to be open about the things that have been affecting him. He's had a tough old time. He's had, from what we understand from reports in Brazil, a person that was been a part of his life for a long, long time, an advisor type. They've parted their ways, and I think this was someone that he would spend a lot of his time with, living with, and it was a real kind of rock within his life. And to no longer have that kind of rock in his life, it's been difficult for him. And I thought that was so important for him to openly express that and the need to talk about it. And then obviously, as soon as he came back to Spurs, everyone all the players just gathered around him. They just became this real kind of desire of, like you say, both kind of literally and figuratively pushing him to the front, essentially saying, this is your time, go out there. And to come off the bench, do what he did. That was his 50th Premier League goal as well. He's in quite a select company. I think it's only Firmino and Gabriel Jesus that have scored 50 or more goals in the Premier League as Brazilians. And to have that moment, to go out there and do that, but then also be so crucial to the winner. Let's be honest, we talk about football and beautiful moments. That was one of them. It was. And I think he now uses that as the springboard for what comes next.
I hope you are right. You talk about it feeling like a film script. I actually made a film about Tottenham Hotspur just before the new stadium opened. And everyone I interviewed while making it talked about the Spurs tradition of football. That idea of Spurs, the classical, historic idea that at the end of the day, Spurs fans like flamboyance. They like Glenn Hoddle. They like Paul Gascoigne. They like Gareth Bale. I actually interviewed Jurgen Klinsmann for the film, and we talked about how Ozzy Ardiles, a Spurs legend as a player, turned slightly crazy manager. He'd play often 5 players up front. And I said it almost like, isn't that ridiculous? And Jurgen hit me on the back and laughed really hard. And he said, it almost worked too, with a little Jurgen cackle. And is that ultimately Ange's greatest achievement so far? Restoring, with the likes of, you mentioned him, the mischievously creative James Maddison, Bissouma just in his pomp charging through that gut, Manor Solomon doing work, restoring that buccaneering style of play that ultimately is Tottenham Hotspur's classic DNA that's been lost of recent years.
Absolutely. There's so much throwback to this kind of new era. Maddison, is he the new Gaza? Is he the new Ericsson? Bissouma, is he the new Dembele? Even Manor Solomon, the way he runs reminds me of Aaron Lennon. The arms just slightly up in the air. There is so much of the pleasing nature of Tottenham Hotspur. But I actually also think within a structure that's more solid than we expect. I think that's the beauty of the Postecoglou game, is that there is a strong structure, but around it, they're also given license as long as everyone else fills in and does what they were supposed to do. It's like a bit Tottenham total football. It's that kind of aspect to it. And you can't help but get swept away in it. It's an exciting style of football. And for Spurs fans, we're looking distant past. You're looking like Arthur Rose pushing run side of the 50s. You're talking Bill Nix, double winning side. That's kind of the frame of reference in terms of big trophies, big trophies. Of course, there's a cup-winning team in the more recent-ish history. But yeah, it's about getting that exciting, flamboyant kind of flair player element, but allied to a bit of a steel underneath it. And if he can get that right, we'll see not only a throwback, but a brand new Tottenham Hotspur, and that'll be exciting.
Good. So we're getting to the crux of the conversation here, Alasdair. Because that flamboyance, that entertainment, that ebullient joy, which has been the Tottenham way. Honestly, as a neutral, I was always drawn to Tottenham as a kid growing up, 70s, 80s, who had the best shirts, and just ebullient football. Is that enough? I do believe, full disclosure, that football ultimately is about memories and the experiences that we have, the feelings we have watching it as fans. And, again, you mentioned it up top. Ange gave me that beautiful lecture when I chatted with him, that football is about fathers and mothers and sons and daughters and the memories they make watching, just like you said, because that was his just that's his Rosetta Stone with his own father, Jimmy, in Australia. Is that enough? Is that enough? Put another way, Spurs have not won a trophy since 2008, as every single Arsenal fan will be the first to tell you. Is silverware all that matters?
I think the key thing to it is, yes, the journey can be as important as the destination and how you enjoy your way there. But I think you have to still get there in the end. That's how it's always been to me. There's so many moments along the way that you can enjoy. It might be a longer path, a longer road to get there, but ultimately I do think you need to. And even Daniel Levy at the Fans Forum this week, he admitted that he appointed Conte and Mourinho because he was affected by the noise from the fans and some players that we've got to win. We've got to win now. And he abandoned a lot of his beliefs in the way that football should be played because of that need to just win something. And it didn't work. It didn't work. Who knew that you could put jigsaw pieces from another puzzle into a different one and it doesn't actually fit? And so he's gone back to exactly the kind of football he wants with Postecoglou. And I feel like we're enjoying it. I think the fans certainly will continue to enjoy it. But ultimately, Postecoglou's a winner. He wants trophies as well. It's not just about the journey. It is that destination.
So many memes flung at your club by your haters. Which one annoys you most? And if you're being honest, is it that crap Photoshop of the empty Spurs new trophy cabinet at the new stadium?
Yeah, I think it has to be. There are just so many. But they just recycled. Every team uses them, don't they? And just changes the logos and the names on them. But yeah, the trophy cabinet is ridiculous. And people talking about when they go on the tour of the stadium, how few trophies there are to look at. And the East Anglian Cup and things like that are kind of whacked on the honours list and things like that. And yeah, I think it'll change. I do believe football's like cyclical. I think the cycle will come around again. And I think Spurs will have their day again. And hopefully we're seeing the early steps of that.
To wrap this up, hopes and expectations, they're now higher for this side after the start of the season. But what does success look like for this team, for Ange's team this season?
Improvement, definitely. That's first off the bat. They can't slide backwards like they did last season. I think the style of football is so crucial. This needs to continue. Obviously, this is a season where it's looking likely that England might have an extra spot in the Champions League. So why not try to aim for at least the top 5, if not more? Obviously, the Carabao Cup is now out of the real view window, which is a big shame because I think that could have been a little early foot in the water, as it were, in the trophies that they want to come. I think ultimately this club need to show that they're going somewhere. And if the Spurs fans feel that, like we talk about the journey and destination, if they can start to see that there is a destination, that's the biggest thing, I think, this season.
God, Alasdair, last question. I am an Everton fan. My father chose that destiny. He went to watch Everton in the days when, as a kid, you go and watch Liverpool one week, Everton the other week, and ultimately chose Everton for random reasons because the newsagent was out of Liverpool buttons when he went to go and buy one. And as an 8-year-old kid, he wanted instant gratification. He said, "We've got lots of Everton ones left, lad." And so he bought an Everton button, and we've ridden with Everton ever since. And he spent a lot of time in old age agonising how we would be very different people if we had, become Liverpool fans and won things and experienced, what's the feeling again? Happiness, I think it's called. You are a lifelong Spurs fan. Do you ever think how you would be different if you were a Gunner?
Oh my goodness. What a question. What a question to throw at me. Ooh. That's blown my mind even trying to think of that. I come from such a big Spurs supporting family. Although we do have a few Arsenal outliers in the family. And funnily enough, my first ever game of football as a kid was the League Cup final that Arsenal lost. They took me and my dad as like undercover agents almost in the crowd as Spurs fans trying to hide our delight that Luton were beating them. So yeah, it's really weird that my first ever game was an Arsenal game.
How old?
Oh my goodness. I'm trying to work out when that would have been. Probably 8, 9, 10, somewhere around that mark.
I like to imagine a little with a child beard, a young Alasdair Gold just sitting there, feeling like, yes, trying to subdue the delight when Luton scored. But how would you? It's a serious question. Do you think you'd be a happier person?
Well, to be fair, Arsenal have had their ups and downs as well. They've had more recent success, obviously. Of course they have, and they've won league titles in the more recent. But they've had some, yeah, they've had issues. They've had a new stadium being built. There's been quite a bit of kind of a mirror to what's been happening at Spurs. I would probably find some way to be tortured by it all as well. I'm sure I would. I'd probably just change my expectations and get just annoyed at different things.
Oh, at the end of the day, Alasdair, we're all going to die. Can I get a score prediction for Sunday?
Score prediction. I will go for 2-2, and I think I would probably take that from that stadium as well.
Richarlison, 3 goals in that 2-2 draw.
One ruled out for offside, yeah.
Alasdair Gold, you're a remarkable human being. Follow him right now on YouTube at Alasdair Gold Journalist. America, Alasdair, it's spelt the Scottish Gaelic way. Alasdair. Oh, and also, get his coverage. Tell us where to find it, Alasdair.
You can find me on football.london, writing every day about Tottenham Hotspur.
And bring in, honestly, a dose of just insight. You're far too intelligent. You're far too empathetic. You're far too human to be covering the football. We are not worthy of you, Alasdair Gold. Savour every second. Enjoy it, Spurs fans. Alasdair, Godspeed.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.